We are now going to write equations for sequences, but this time, instead of using explicit equations, we're going to write recursive equations like we did in our last video, where we go from step to step to step. So recursive sequences mean that in order to get to the next step, we need to know previous steps before it. So we're going to find a pattern and use that to create the equation. So from 7 to 16, we're adding 9. 16 to 25, we're adding 9, and we continue to add 9, and that pattern goes on. We can see that right here. So in order to get to the next step in our sequence, we need to take the step before it, or the previous step, and add 9. Well, in our last video, we saw the sequence notation that said a sub n. That's the name of some value in our sequence. The value before that was given by a sub n minus 1. So we have some step and the step before it, and our pattern is that we add 9 to this step. So we get plus 9. And that's our recursive formula, or our recursive rule, but there's one thing that we absolutely have to have. In order to add 9 to a step before, we need some place to start. We need a value to begin that process. So that value will usually be the first step in the sequence. So a sub 1, the value of our first step, is 7. We've given that on the table right here, so we're just going to write that down. You could start with another value if you wanted to, but it's typical to start with the first value. So let's find the pattern on this one. From 243 to 81, 81 to 27, to 9, and to 3, we are dividing by 3. Dividing by 3. Now I prefer writing that as multiplication because that works a little bit better with our notation for exponential functions. So instead of dividing by 3, I'm going to write that we are multiplying by 1/3. Okay, so in order to get to the next step in our sequence, we're going to take the step before it and multiply it by 1/3. So that is a sub n to get to some step in our sequence. A sub n minus 1 would be the step before it. We're going to take that value and multiply this by 1/3, and I can write that just by putting a 1/3 right next to this because that means multiplication. Again, we need a starting value, so that would be a sub 1, and our first value on this one is 243. Let's look at one more over here on the graph. So we're given a whole bunch of points on the graph, and I find it best for having a table of values. So I'm going to take the values, which I've written right here, and I'm going to write them as a table of values with our n and a sub n. So right here, our n value is 1. So at 1, it was 2. This is the next one, 2 and negative 4. After that, we have 3 and 8. And our last one here is 4 and negative 16. And we can see that the pattern from one step to the next is that we're multiplying by negative 2. So a sub n, to get to our next step, is equal to a sub n minus 1, the previous step, and we're going to multiply that by negative 2. Again, we need our first value, which is 2, so a sub 1 equals 2, and we're finished up with the recursive rule on that one. Thank you very much.